Hey everyone, Shady here, and welcome to the hopefully first of many Skinny Man devlog videos. So today, I'm hopefully going to be completing the feature that I've been realistically working on for a little while now. And in specifics, this video is supposed to be for development on Skinny Man version 0.9.1. Although I know the game right now currently says 9.0, but you know, I've got stuff going on and reasons why that's happening. So the thing that I'm currently working on and will hopefully get completed and into a passable state in this video is the current brand new implementation of a 3D shadowing system, which as you can see is seemingly working. As I was saying, the shadowing system is visually working right here, but it's not to my satisfaction for a few reasons. But as you can see, it does look to be working relatively decently here, but there are a couple issues. To show these issues in a little bit more of a clear way, I've taken the liberty of taking some screenshots that we can zoom in on here. Here's a screenshot of later in the level where I feel like some of these things are very obvious. So we can zoom in first of all on the player here, and this is interesting. I've never actually zoomed in on it like this. For the most part, the player looks pretty normal here, but the shadow is, well, I'd say a little bit fuzzy for my likings. I'd like the shadow to be sharper, but that is effectively the least of our worries at the moment. More importantly, you'd see that this side of the head here, this should be a single solid color for the most part, but as you can see, it is very clearly not. There is, well, a darker section in the center here, slightly lighter on the outside, maybe that's fine, but these darker patches in the center here are absolutely not something that I want to have. And additionally, you can see that on the character's back here, there's also the same thing. Same sort of thing appears on the tree, and probably most noticeably and most frequently on the actual side of the platform here. Now, looking in this direction, it doesn't appear like there's anything, and that is relatively interesting. Additionally, here you can see that at the very edge of the platform here, there is a lighter section followed by the intersection being darker, and then there are these kind of dashed bands going across the actual ground here. To go further, I kind of need to explain a little bit about how the shadowing system works. So this shadowing system is an implementation of a technique called shadow mapping, which I'm not going to explain in detail here because that would take way too long, but just know that there is a depth buffer that is rendered from the light source, and that is used to calculate whether a pixel should be in shadow. Now, that process involves a fair amount of floating point calculations to convert locations of pixels to pixels in other light space, and then convert that back. And I'm thinking that the reason for all these issues, which, you know, this should not be appearing, is because of floating point precision loss. So something I did to try to, you know, validate myself is I took a little bit of a liberty with the shader here of instead of rendering colors, rendering out what the sample of the depth buffer on each actual pit of geometry is, which first of all gives us this very trippy looking thing, and trust me, playing through the game like this is even trippier as all these lines move. But with this, it actually becomes a little bit apparent, at least, what these horizontal lines are here that is equivalent to these lines here. Now, specifically, the reason why the colors look like this is a result of how the depth information is encoded in color values from a floating point number. All that being said, what I'm more interested in is this edge here. This edge should be basically a smooth straight line, almost like this edge is here. And I'm not entirely sure if these edges are what is actually causing these lines there, but it's a possibility due to, again, floating point precision resolution things. But yeah, of a lot more consequence is this. What the heck is going on here with this? I mean, this is just where it's most visible because obviously this is an extreme color change here. I'm sure that this sort of thing is going on in this area as a lot less visible due to the fact that it's a smoother color transition. So what I've tried to do to make the situation better is I've tried to increase the resolution of the actual depth buffer itself, but that didn't seem to affect anything, which is what makes me think it's a floating point precision error. So what I'm planning on doing is I'm planning on taking the depth buffer that exists, splitting it into, like, say, quarters, so like this, but obviously it's going to be perfect, done by the computer, and then having the shader that actually draws stuff sample the correct one of these, and hopefully that will mean that it has greater floating point precision, in theory. So I guess let's get into the coding of that. Okay, it is hours later, and I have something to show. Stuff is vaguely working, or no, it's not actually, like not actually at all. Like what the heck is this going on? So first of all, as you can see, shadows are definitely not being presented around the actual character that they're supposed to, but you can see here, and this isn't the easiest thing, so maybe I'll zoom in the actual recording, that shadows are being shown in shadow. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. It's probably something that is wrong with the shader code, honestly. That or things, I mean, well, okay. First of all, this is what the actual depth buffer is fully rendered out right now. So this here where my mouse is clearly corresponding to this. So that's clearly being mapped to the wrong place. Oh yeah, and second, it's only actually being displayed within an actual shadow of itself. Now if I press this other button I configured here you can see, now this should be showing me just what's being sampled from the depth texture onto the actual world, but I have co-opted this thing that I've added to help me debug like what is actually being sampled from what. Oh, and this is really weird now that I look at this. But yeah, anyhow, this is a texture. Here, hang on a second. This texture, which is specifically every pixel is different, but it repeats, but every pixel is different, but the colors are changed in a way where I should theoretically be able to see differences. And yeah, this is clearly, I guess, the center right here, as this does not seem to fit. Like, there's just straight up red right there. That's not correct. And then there's yellow right next to that, so there's clearly like a corner or something right there of some sort of edge. I'm not sure. Actually, I should just create a really big flat platform, and that will actually show me. So clearly these things are not, it should be like looking around that normal texture, not this whatever. So I got some fixing to do here. Okay, I finally debugged the shader enough to find part of the problem, and part of the problem was in fact that I was conditionally doing things wrong. My condition for checking if a point fell outside of the shader or outside of the depth buffer texture was, well, it was checking if a point was outside of the area instead of inside the area, and so I was incorrectly using that value. I've fixed that, and now on your screen you see the other thing that I was debugging. So, as a reminder, we split this into 4 sections, but there are 9 distinct colors on the screen, plus a white border, and everything else is black because that's not important. So, the area in white is area that should be covered by one of these splits, but isn't, and the areas in color should each be one color, but are 2 things overlapping. So I just don't have the clipping bounds for any of these things set correctly, which means I need to figure out how to make them bigger. But that is relatively easy compared to all the shader debugging I've been doing. I hate debugging shaders. It's so difficult. Okay, I'm gonna quickly hop in with a little after narration right now to explain what the actual problem was with this system. So the issue definitely was an issue with how I was determining where the projected cameras for the 4 quadrants of this were actually located in world space. And so the error I simply made is I was expecting that the size of this white box here was exactly equal to 1 times the length that I had decided for, when in actuality it was twice the length, as the length was being measured from the center of the clipping area for this white box. So it was measured as 1 length this way and 1 length this way. I, for whatever reason, forgot about that and thought that the entire length of this was 1. So to determine the center position of each of these subdivisions of the main clipping area, I had moved each of these things 1/4 of the set amount distance instead of half of the distance that I was supposed to. That was the problem in this situation. Okay, so the overlapping areas issue was fixed as simply as changing this here from divide by 4 to divide by 2. I'm not entirely sure why. I thought my math was good, but apparently this math is better. So, okay. Hopefully now I can just put everything back together how it's supposed to be in the shader, and it will just work. Hopefully. Okay, one last clip before I put everything together and make it work. I just needed to make sure that everything was actually lined up in the proper position. So here's my little testing UV texture that I made, which is supposed to have every pixel on the texture being unique. As you can see, Hopefully this is everything in the correct spot. I did have to flip this corner and this corner because they were apparently the wrong textures, but that's correct now. So hopefully now, fingers crossed, everything gets put together and just flipping works. Okay, so here's everything put back together and I have no clue what's going on. It like a quarter worked? So this section here, which is represented by one of the quarters, it seems to be working correctly. You can see that it's actually quite sharp as well. I mean, when it's not covered in shadow from other things. The shadows seem to be correct. I'm not seeing any weird artifacting. All looks good on that front. But for some reason, the other 3 sections are just completely shrouded in darkness. And I'm not sure as to why that would be. Actually, I have a guess. But additionally to that, there's a weird texture going on in them, and that is very much confusing to me. But within that texture, there is also a shadow. If you look at the player here, the shadow actually does continue into the other thing, and the flag here has a shadow, and I don't know. I'm gonna see if I did something wrong in the shader code. Okay, so I did it. It's working now. Ignore the very, very poor performance of the character here. I'm actually not sure why that is. It's definitely just a visual thing. It's not actually performing poorly. In fact, no idea. I gotta work on a camera smoothing thing in the future. Not this update though. This update's bloated / taken long enough as is. But yeah, as you can see, we have shadows that look good. There's no very noticeable artifacting. I am noticing a little bit of artifacting here, but I'm guessing that that's probably, yeah, that's like right on the line of one of the things. So, you know, we're just gonna have to deal with that. And that is not very noticeable. So other than that, I'd say this has now been a success. We're still getting 60 FPS here. And as for if you're wondering what the solution was, so we'll come down here to the shader. So right here, I don't know why this makes a difference, to be clear. It makes no logical sense to me. But what I had before is I had, instead of having this entire thing as one long mathematical statement here adding each line, I had each line individually separate and just said visibility plus equals on each line, which is apparently the wrong answer. So the very first thing on the list, if I commented this one out, it would go for this one, would look perfect and clear, but the rest would look like absolute shadow dog shit, and I don't know why, but that is quite frankly what was just happening. And this here was all the code that I was using for debugging what was going on with what thing was being displayed where. And then this other stuff is just reading the correct map and putting it in there. I have other stuff on the processing side to switch what's actually being put into those buffers to be this texture instead of the actual depth texture. I'm going to switch this back to being, or maybe I'll add, whatever. I'll probably just switch this back to actually just rendering the normal depth texture, or the depth texture in here instead of this crazy thing. I mean, look, don't get me wrong, this looks pretty cool, but this isn't what I want for debug information here. Yeah, now that I've got this done, I can actually go implement the proper changing the resolution of the actual like underlying depth map feature that I originally wanted to implement. Because these shadows do still look a little bit fuzzy, but that can absolutely be dealt with, hopefully, by simply increasing the size of the texture. Actually, I'm going to quickly check that, but we're going to go implement that settings now. Okay, so I've cranked the resolution of the shadow texture to what I've programmed as the max right now, which is like over 8,000 by 8,000. And the artifacts have reappeared. In fact, there are additional artifacts from the actual like separation of the images. And also the actual like size of these, okay, I mean, that maybe that should be brought back a little bit more, but the size of these actual, it's actually worse. What? And this is rendering at like 8,000 by 8,000. My GPU's handling this like a champ, but like the quality is actually worse here. If I go higher resolution here, maybe I just shouldn't have much of a shadow quality resolution option besides dropping it. You know, I'm going to try dropping it way down and see if that makes it better. And yeah, also that some of the other artifacting has noticeably, I mean, it's not very noticeable, but definitely has come back. Not to the extent that it was before, but damn, cranking the resolution does the opposite of what I expected it to do. I did, as I said, not expect that to happen. Okay, so you may not believe me, but I switched to the lowest resolution now, and it also has that problem with the line in the center. I'm not entirely sure what why that exists. I know it's like the difference between two images, or the two images, and maybe I could do a thing to make it sample one of them or the other one instead of neither of them. But man, that is a little bit annoying. But yeah, the quality is predictably also lower. There's apparently a sweet spot for this stuff. Well, once I actually get the option to change the option, and I'll have to do some testing for the sweet spot. Theoretically, the higher resolution might be able to yield more, because again, floating point precision starts to come back in. It might be able to yield more if we added more like divisions, so we went from like 4 divisions to 9 divisions of the depth buffer. But I really don't want to deal with going through that right now. Theoretically, it wouldn't be nearly as hard to implement as the first one, as I kind of know what I'm doing now, but it would still be a pain to implement, and also having to choose between the two, I'd rather not. So, yeah, let's get to doing stuff on that setting. Alright, so here's what the settings menu is now looking like. We just had these 2 buttons before, and now we have all these buttons with all these descriptions. So, first of all, you may notice that I've kept the off and old shadows as options, even though you probably shouldn't use them. Then we just have 3 instead of the, like, 7. I wasn't going to be that much, but, you know, I was originally wanting to have more, and then when those were just actually poor quality, due to probably floating point precision, I was like, okay, let's just not do that. So we have low, medium, and high as the shadow settings options. And I actually took the liberty of going and screenshotting each of them to like show what they all look like. So here's low to start with, and something you may notice is that there is a little bit of an artifact here. Yes, the I'm surprised there's not a perpendicular artifact to that, but yeah, the seam, I guess I'll call it, of the 2 images. Oh, there's another little artifact right here I just noticed. But it stops right there. Okay, that's really strange, actually. But anyhow, the big one that's actually noticeable for the most part, but you know, you're on low, what do you expect? Probably to not do this, to be fair. But this one is caused by the seam, I believe, between the actual split images that we did earlier. And they don't fit entirely correctly together. And maybe I just have to do something in the shadow where I'm like, okay, just you can sample a little bit further out of the image. Because I have noticed on higher resolutions, you can also, oh, here's the vertical one. You can also sometimes see a little bit of a seam, and it's kind of straight. It's like 1 or 2 pixels. It's just a lot more noticeable here because the pixels are so much bigger. That is a single pixel, though. Strange. Anyhow, so here's what medium looks like. This is going to be the default. Yeah, not really anything in the way of noticeable artifacting for me. And then here's high. And you might notice, actually, let's zoom in on the tree here. You might notice there's no visual difference at the moment, at least at this scale, between medium and high. So I guess that's good. High will probably just be more for if you have like a much higher, or you're playing the game at generally higher resolution, in which case higher resolution, the underlying shadow map, would actually be good. I'm guessing that whatever fuzz around it that is around the shadows, that is, I guess, the intentional dithering of the shadows that we would have had otherwise. So I guess it's fine. Oh, actually, this is on high. I think it's, no, that's a medium. I think that's also visible on high here, to a lesser extent. This is the vertical seam. Oh, and I guess it's like right here too. That's the vertical seam between 2 of the images for the shadow map. So yeah, that is something that can be improved. Also, actually, I did notice this other thing while I was playing around here. Let me show. Alright, so here's what I've noticed. You see that as I move forwards here, the back of the head and I guess shirt appear to be flickering in and out of shadow. Now, from what I can tell, the reason for this is there is often at least a millisecond of delay in between when the shadow map is, or when the level geometry is sent to the shadow map, which includes the player, and when the actual level gets rendered for real. And in that millisecond, the physics thread recalculates the player's position a little bit when moving. Therefore, the player's in a slightly different position in the shadow map than it was in the original. So theoretically, the solution is to just use the same player position in both situations instead of allowing it to be updated. So I'll implement that real quick. Alright then, that was a pretty simple fix. And yeah, I think with that, that's going to be the end of this video, because we got shadows fully functional, and this is more or less how shadows will appear once this version of the game releases. As a reminder, this is not yet, or this version of the game shown in the video is not yet released, but there is a version of the game that is currently released. So give that a check, check that out. The link's in the description. Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Who knows how long it'll be till then?